I don't know if people have ever had this experience, but I have, which is we drove literally over a 5-foot berm, and there was 100 feet between this berm and the next berm, and in between it, I can only imagine, was a whole bunch of buried things that people shouldn't be driving over.
Hey everyone, welcome to Tracer Burnout. I'm Roger.
And I'm Dan. And today we are sitting down with somebody that it's been about almost exactly a year in the making for us to sit down with you. So we are sitting here in the roastery of Aerial Resupply Coffee.
It smells amazing.
And our guest today is Army veteran Mike Klemmer. Hi, Mike.
Hey, how you guys doing? Thanks for coming down to the shop.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having us. Like I said, you were one of the first people that Roger reached out to while he was still up here in Yorktown, you were in the process of growing your business, and we couldn't really nail down a time or a date, and here we are a year later, finally getting it done.
That's right.
So we'll get started the same way we always do. Does your family have a history of service?
Yeah. So my dad, well, actually, I found this out. So my great uncle, grandfather, anyway, comes from the Prussian army, who then, when they emigrated to the United States, served in World War I in the army.
Nice.
And then my grandfather from my mother's side was in the Navy. My dad was a Marine. My brother was a Marine. I was Army. And then various cousins in different services. And then my oldest son, served in the Navy for 5 years. And then my youngest son is enlisting in the Army here come March. So I guess you could say definitely
cool.
have
family business.
Family business, yeah.
But nobody in the Space Force yet.
Nobody in the Space Force. No, I don't know if you can do that.
Real.
This is Dan's white whale. Yes.
Well,
there's a flag. I mean,
there is.
You can market anything, right? I mean, you can definitely say there's something. I don't know. I have friends of mine who were Air Force who are now Space Force who I think are legit. So I would say it exists. What they do, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I haven't met any yet. So until we sit one down in front of the microphone, they're not real.
I could probably help you with that. I could probably help you scratch that one off the chalkboard.
Perfect.
We've had more Coast Guard people on the show than Space Force. So
we love our Coasties too.
Oh yeah, you gotta love them. Yeah, they're great people, great Americans.
Yeah.
So we established this before we started recording. But you're from Arizona, so how does a kid from Arizona end up in the Army?
So I think, not like everyone, but so I went to college, came out of high school, went to college. I was like, hey, I'm gonna be a mechanical engineer. And I got into college, and I was like, this is not what I want to do.
Where did you go to school?
Northern Arizona University up in Flagstaff. And spent a year up there, kind of got my head twisted over a girl and was like, all right, it's time to leave this and go do something else. Went back down to Tucson, which is where I was from, and then stayed at the University of Arizona for a little while, and then just one day woke up and be like, I don't really want to do college anymore. And just kind of ended my college career, and then spent about a year doing absolutely nothing, being broke and not really living up to what I thought I was going to be doing. And just kind of got sick of it one day and decided to drive down to the Army recruiter. I actually walked into the Air Force first, and I was like, hey, just wanted to learn more about it, and was really more interested in flying helicopters. That was kind of the thing that I really wanted to do. Air Force was like, yeah, that's not really going to happen here. Thanks, but no thanks. Because my dad was a Marine, I walked into the Marine Corps, and I was in the Marine recruiting office for about 3 minutes, and the recruiter was like, so you ready to join? And I was like, I'm just trying to find information, and kind of was a little aggressive and was like, well, you should know if you want to be a Marine or not. I was like, see ya. Walked out the door.
This is obviously not for me.
Yeah, this is not for me, right?
Yeah.
Walked over to the Army, and then had a couple good conversations with the Army recruiters, and just really kind of decided that I needed to have a kick in the pants, and I needed something. And I knew I wasn't going to join the Navy just because I didn't really want to be on a boat like that. I preferred to I would be willing to do most everything. I just wanted to be able to walk. Like,
Terra firma.
yeah, I'd like to be on land. So, joined the Army and said, this is what I need to do to right the ship, so to speak, even though it wasn't the Navy.
So the Army was really kind of like last resort.
Yeah. Well, I knew that I mean, even though I went and talked to the Marine Corps, it wasn't like I knew I was going to be a Marine. Like, I'd always kind of looked at the Army and been like, all right, this is what I want to do. And it was mostly because of and I didn't even know it at the time, but it was mostly because you could choose the career that you wanted to do in the Army, vice all of the other branches. Like, you really get to say, this is what I want to do, and then the Army sticks to that promise so long as you meet all the requirements, and then you go off and do that job. And that was one of the things that even as I was entering, without knowing squat about the Army, was, hey, what am I going to do when I get out of the Army, so that I at least have some sort of skill set? And I actually showed up and I was like, yeah, I want to be a mechanic. And the guy looked at my ASVAB score and was like, no, you don't want to be a mechanic.
God bless our
you
mechanics.
You need to be, I love mechanics, right? They're great, but he's like, you need to pick something else.
What year was this?
1999.
So the late 90s. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I went through, I did that in 99, and then I went into the delayed enlistment program, and then I actually shipped out at the end of March and started basic training in April.
So which MOS did you choose and why?
So I chose 96 Hotel, which doesn't exist anymore. It was Common Ground Station Operator for a program called JSTARS, which, if you're not familiar with JSTARS, is essentially just a giant airborne radar that, instead of scanning the air like AWACS, it scans the ground, is really what it is. Had no idea what it was when I signed up, and I chose it because they were giving me a $20,000 bonus, and I was like, "I'll take the money."
Sold.
Let's do it. I mean, listen, when you're eating, once a day, and you're eating, dollar value meal type things because that's what you can scrounge out of the change drawer in your car, or whatever.
I know it well.
You're not going to be that picky, and I wasn't. And I was like, "All right, that sounds decent. I'll do that." And so that's what I chose.
Ramen noodles and bouillon cubes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you're really going to splurge, you can put like an egg in that ramen noodle.
That's true. That's true. Not knowing what I know now, I probably could have been like, well, I'm going to, make this giant casserole and freeze it, and the cost per everything would go way down. But I was young. I was 21. I was dumb. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just trying to survive, and like many people. And
Yeah. Okay, so it was a 96 Hotel?
96 Hotel.
Okay, so where is the basic training for that? Or where was the basic training for that?
Well, I went to Fort Sill. So they sent me to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I was, if I remember correctly, I was Delta Company 122. So that was interesting. That was fun. Everybody's basic training, I think, is very similar. But it was 11 weeks, and then they shipped me off to Fort Huachuca. So Fort Huachuca's right in my backyard, which was kind of cool. So it was like you get to go through basic, and then you go right back home. And so I was 45 minutes from my house that I essentially had for my parents had left Tucson to move up to Colorado Springs. So Arizona, Tucson was still my home, but it was kind of cool to be right there back in the backyard. Like, it was almost like you'd never left. I was just wearing an Army uniform and then going through training.
After college and then a year of doing nothing, what was the adjustment like?
Like, into the Army?
Yeah.
I mean, at first, I think I was like, what the hell am I doing? Right? Even when you're going through the Army process, when you're going through it all, you're like, hey, what is this garbage? Like, why am I being told what to do? Why am I kind of being, and so there was it was a kick in the pants, because all of a sudden things I wasn't doing on my own, I was now required to do.
Yeah.
And there was some resistance for me on that part, but it was what I wanted out of the Army experience. Like, I'd already said to myself, like, I need to course correct what I was doing with my life anyway. And so the structure of it really helped me just kind of just grow up, I guess is the best way to say it. Like, it really forced me to grow
It's a forcing mechanism.
It was a forcing mechanism. It was like, you got to grow up and be an adult. You just can't, run around and, play with cars and everything else. Yeah.
So was that, aside from the bonus, Was that kind of like the big reason for joining? Is I'm going to do 3 years, 4 years, however long that initial enlistment was, and I'm going to get out and I'm going to be back on the right track?
No, no, I joined without really knowing what I was going to do 5 years from then. Like, so my initial contract was a 5-year commitment, and I signed on the dotted line and said, let's go. And I had no idea what 5 years from now was going to hold. It was just, let's do something that is not this, that's going to put me in a position. And my hope was, that it was going to help me, and I was willing to do whatever pretty much the Army said. I just wanted a purpose and direction and to say, hey, just go do this. And so that was kind of the guiding principle. I'd love to say there was a lot more thought behind it, but I mean, it was just, I'd like to eat, I'd like to have a bed, I'd like to, not have to worry about whether or not I'm going to survive, the next day or the next week.
Yeah, but I mean, your intuition was right. I mean, you knew that you needed purpose and to take action.
Oh yeah.
And whatever comes, we'll deal with it but indecision is a decision, right?
Well, right. And like I had left college without a degree. I never even really made it into my major because I just kept on toiling in like this, like here's all the prereqs, and I didn't really do well. I wasn't putting any effort into it whatsoever. And so I was just like, well, college is not going to work. And I was like, I need to do something different. So I just chose the radical nuclear option and said, hey, I'm going to join the Army and let's go.
Yeah. Okay. So Fort Huachuca.
That's right.
Tell us about your MOS training. Like, because this is an MOS that doesn't exist anymore.
No, it doesn't.
So tell us about it.
So Huachuca is interesting. It is, home to the Military Intelligence School. Now it's the Military Intelligence Center of Excellence.
Center of Excellence.
Everything is a center of excellence. Back then, that didn't exist.
Excellence.
The
Hadn't
only-
been invented yet.
In fact, the only thing I knew about Huachuca before I even joined the Army was that 11th Signal was there. That was it. And that's only because I saw it on the news, and I saw every time they were rotating back from Kosovo or whatever, they're like, oh, 11th Signal's back. And, and Tucson is home to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, so you get to see the A-10s flying all over the place. So, there's a heavy military culture in Tucson anyway. So when I went into Huachuca, I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. But even through basic training, so like when I signed and said, hey, I'm going to be in 96 Hotel, and then I went to basic, there was, I think, like 11 of us in basic. None of us knew what 96 Hotel, we didn't even know what it was. We signed our name on it, and they were like, yeah, you're going to be a common ground station operator. Like, what's that?
Sounds good.
They're like, oh, well, it's this. What is that? Like, what do you do? And nobody can answer the question. So we get to Huachuca.
You'll know when you need to know.
Well, yeah, right. So we get to Huachuca, and of course, they're like, here's all the clearance stuff, and here's everything you need to do. And you go through, I think the training was like 22 weeks, so we were there for 6 months. And, like the first 2 months was nothing but just like Common Core, here's what Intel people do, and like a variety of different Intel stuff. And then when they finally bridge you onto, what it is, everybody's slowly starting to learn what the job actually is. And really what it is it's just you're tracking radar signatures of different vehicles and then making some assumptions based on order of battle is what you're doing. And it is it's a cool MOS, but it's completely reliant on the Air Force. Like if the Air Force E-8's not flying overhead, like you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
And so, so right away I started looking at this going like, okay, this job is, it's cool, but it's like super situational dependent. And without like going too in depth, like it, if you're in like an urban environment, it doesn't work very well. It works really well in like the desert of Iraq or like a Desert Storm style, like here's a glass table, we can see everything. It doesn't really
massing
work.
Forces and
if you're in a mountain, it's not going to work. Yeah, it's not working in Afghanistan. It's not working in certain places, And so, I think it was a product of something that was built for the previous war, and not something built for the next generational wars.
Right.
And so, it was interesting. I mean, so like I was in E3, and I was a PFC, and so it was a lot of learning again, who I was and, what this job was, and then what my role as I was growing up in the Army, even for the first, 8 months to 9 months, what that was like.
So this is, at this point, it's early 2000?
No, it's like, so when I ended in November 2000.
Yeah.
Is when I graduated from and went on to my first duty assignment.
The reason why I bring it up is just time and space, right? So at this point, all of the schoolhouse, all the doctrine, everything is still, this is the post-Cold War era. So you're still probably learning a lot of the Cold War stuff, because at this point, that's really all that's left. This is the end of history. It's the peace dividend. We don't really know what's going to happen the following year quite yet.
No, well, and it was really kind of interesting, because as I was going through the schoolhouse, I'm looking over, and there's a lot of people. There's a lot of the other MOSs that are all around going through different training, and they were still doing Morse code. And I look over at the Morse operators, and I was like, what? And these guys are, they go to school and they just have to get faster and faster and faster at what they're doing for Morse and everything else. And I'm like, talk about an MOS lost in space and time, but here we are in 2000 still training that as if it was, the absolute requirement, because they were sending people through these schools like it was, you couldn't believe.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so you got done with your training in November of 2000?
Yes.
Okay, and then where were you off to?
1st Cavalry Division, Fort Hood, Texas, back when it was Hood.
The great place.
It is a place. It is a place.
Yes, I hear, what is it, Killeen?
Killeen, Harker Heights, Coppers Cove, you name it. It is a
wonderful town.
It is a wonderful town. It was interesting driving on there it's interesting having been in the Army prior to September 11th, because I don't think unless you're like an old hat like us or whatever, you don't really remember what it was like when you could drive onto an installation and it was just open to the general public, right? Like it didn't matter. There was no ID check, nothing. You just drove right on. And but my first experience was watching, traffic in the morning for PT, and you have, 30,000 people all, awake at 5:45 in the morning, and you have 30,000 people trying to drive onto the installation and do the exact same thing and be there by 6:30 for the, reveille, and then everybody starts doing PT. And it was a very unique experience coming from Arizona, where, you're by yourself and you don't have that, you just go to work or whatever, but it's not this crush of people trying to come onto an installation at one time.
Yeah.
Okay. So what were you doing? Where were you assigned, and what was going on?
So I was
I mean, it's less than a year before 9/11, so.
Yep. So I was part of the 312th MI battalion, which was, so it was the last battalion on Motor Pool, or on Battalion Avenue, closest to the west side of Fort Hood. So Fort Hood is, a 4-mile expanse of motor pools, and we were all the way on the far end. And then I was assigned to the ACE detachment, so I was part of the G2 up at the 1st Cavalry Division headquarters. And so that's, and doing my 96 hotel job. But ACE detachment was a cool introduction, because it was very much an offshoot, I think, of what I had even known what Intel could do, just because it was really hyper specialized on what it provided vice what the G2 provided, or any
what
of
is
the.
ACE?
So it's the analysis and control element, and so it's, if I remember, it's been a long time, but if I remember correctly, mostly what it is more red cell type stuff, more like super analysis of what and processing of what the actual information that's coming in, vice, developing a a collection strategy. Which cool.
Yeah. So to explain red cell, that's us pretending to be the enemy threat in order to make ourselves better.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a very situational, useful MOS.
That's right.
In a very other service dependent field, right? So what were you doing on a daily basis?
Well, for the first 5 years of my Army career, I was a professional landscaper.
As many of us were.
I was
As
very,
many of us were.
very good at mowing lawns. I was very good at picking weeds out of rocks. I had learned what red cycle detail was. Red cycle detail being the kind
Taskings.
of people that just got tagged to go do
The whipping boys.
That's right. That's right. Hey, we need.
Hey, Sergeant Major's detail.
That's right. That's right. So I did that. A lot of field cleaning. Learned more about kit than I ever wanted to. Learned about. I think if I had set up a tent for the division headquarters once, I set it up 30 times in a month. You know, it was
Jump talk.
That's right. That's right. And so
Those dreaded words.
that's right. And back then, I learned all about. I don't even remember the acronym, but EDRES and all sorts of other stuff.
Emergency Deployment Readiness Exercise.
That's right. And so, what it's like to go to the railhead and sit there for no reason and then put everything back.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan and I we're light infantry, artillery and/or soft guys, but we didn't ever have the honor of doing a loadout on a railhead for a heavy unit. Well, okay, maybe I'll speak for myself, but for a mechanized or an armor unit, that sounds miserable to me.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that they always pull the low density MOSs and the low density jobs to go help do those things because they're like, well, what else are you doing right now?
And it's professional development.
Right. Yeah. So, so learned a lot about landscaping and, just general being tasked to do everything.
So the 6 months that you spent at Fort Huachuca learning this intricate and sensitive, specialty, you spent about how much of that time actually doing that job?
Well, there were some training events that we did, and you can run simulations that help. And they did run simulations without the aircraft to be able to do certain training exercises. So, but I mean, you're probably talking 20% of the job, and that's being gracious. 20% of my time was doing it. We did, you have the different training missions both for the Air Force side of it, and there's Army 96 hotel operators operating on the aircraft that help, communicate direct with the Army below, but it wasn't much.
Okay.
So, did you have one?
No. Go
So, serious question. 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you? What are you doing? What is the posture of the unit at this point? What's going on?
So I went to PT that morning.
Yeah.
And it was like any other morning. And I couldn't tell you what happened that morning before the event. I just remember I went back home and I was getting changed. I had showered, I put my boots on. And for some reason, I turned on the news or whatever. Like, I didn't even really know why. I don't remember why I did it. I never watched the news in the morning, nothing. I just happened to turn it on. And then, like, all of a sudden they're showing, like one of the Twin Towers on fire. And I was like, what? And then as I'm watching it, I watched the second aircraft hit the tower. And I was like it just didn't compute. Like, it was one of those things where you know what you're seeing, but at the same time you're like, huh? Mm-hmm. So I was like, all right, I gotta get back. And this is, of course, before the era of cell phones. So, like, nobody has a cell phone, right? So I'm like, all right, well, I got to get back. So I get in the car, I start driving. And as I'm driving up the west side of Fort Hood towards the battalion, I see Abrams going the other direction. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, I've never seen tanks outside of the tank trails or outside of the field literally just driving towards the gate. And so I got on, and they had shut down Fort Hood.
After you got on.
After I got on. So I was like one of the only people to get back on in time.
Yeah.
And so then they tell us what's happening. We start getting more intel about what's going on. And then, of course, we start running into all these different operation stuff. And they're like, well, you're here, so guess what? You're going to be here for a while. And so I was one of the people that, they had us, like, doing all sorts of collection and everything else. But it's just because, like, I really believe, like, nobody really knew what they were supposed to be doing at that time. They're like, just do something.
Do something with my hands.
Let's do something to make it look like we're doing something because we have to do something.
Yeah, I get it.
Well, nobody wanted to feel not useless, but nobody wanted to feel like they weren't helping.
Oh, no, 100%.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I just, but so like that's where I was. So like so I saw that, occur, and then, but it's really, it was interesting watching Fort Hood shut completely down. And like I said, you got 30,000 people that all of a sudden have to get to work.
Yeah.
And, for like, I think it was like 2 weeks, if you weren't awake and coming onto the base at 2:30 in the morning, you were not getting on the base until like 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Like there was this window where people just started rolling in,
Yeah.
and you could not get through the gate.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. It was harder to go to work than it was anything else.
Yeah. I think that was pretty true across most posts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what, say, a couple of months down the road, what was going on with Fort Hood in general, or 1st Cav in general, and then your MI unit specifically?
My MI unit kind of returned to business. It was almost like we kind of went back to the way we were doing it. We had been told, repeatedly that we were going to be on some deployment roster potentially. I mean, we're still in 2001, right? But of course, everybody's, whether it's rumor intelligence or just people making things up or just hoping things come to pass, there's this idea. It's like, hey, you're going to do it. So, but in the near term, it was, hey, prep for the National Training Center, prep for,
Yeah.
what you've been doing this whole time.
Business
and
as usual, right?
just that's what you're going to do. And so that was what 312th was doing. That's what I was doing. And, went through, pretty much all of 2002 the rest of 2001 and 2002 doing the same thing.
So I imagine at some point in 2002, probably towards the end of the year, y'all are already starting to posture for what's coming in early 2003.
Well, they had told us so rumor was 1st Cav's going, and so we had done a ton of posturing to get the brigade or the division to go, right?
What does that mean exactly?
A lot of warfighter exercises out in the field. A lot of like, hey, let's pack up and plan like we're going to the railhead. Hey,
It's like Idris, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, a lot of,
Excuse me.
Just trying to, I think everybody realized that whatever we were doing beforehand, which was all fun and games, now was like, you got to get this thing fixed now because you could be going tomorrow and it's got to be fixed.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the idea. And so that's really what I would say the next, 14 months or that time window between September 11th and like the beginning of 2003. So.
Yeah. Okay. So Iraq kicks off.
Mm-hmm.
You're, at least for now, you're watching from Texas.
That's right.
But are you guys, as soon as, LD happens and rounds start flying, I mean, are you guys pretty much given the warn that you're heading over?
Well, so that was the toss-up between 1st Cav and 4ID. So 1st Cav was told, hey, you're getting ready to go. We had ramped up. We had packed everything up. And then decisions are made, and all of a sudden they're like, nope, you're not going. 4ID is going. And then that was the whole, 4ID is going to go through Turkey. Turkey said, no way. 4ID gets the shaft and has to go end around and then play catch-up. And meanwhile, 1st Cav is just kind of sitting there like, what are we doing with our hands? Went through a couple more NTC rotations, and then, right around the end of the year in 2003, they're like, all right, this is what's going to happen. You guys are on the patch chart before the patch chart ever existed.
Before it was the thing.
Before it was a thing. They're like, hey, you guys are going to come in and you're going to more than likely replace 4ID. And then, so that was, the prep for that.
Okay. Before we get too much further, let's step back a minute. You were doing NTC rotations.
Mm-hmm.
Finish this sentence for me in the most realistic most realistic way possible.
Oh, I can do that.
The National Training Center is
one of the most trying places on earth. It really tests your resilience on a lot of different things and the thing is, you never really know what it is until you're there. I've been to NTC 5 times. I've been there twice as an OC, 3 as actual, I guess, player in
A
the
subject.
box. Subject in the box.
Blue form?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've, the first time I was there, it was kind of like this eyes wide open. You don't really know what you're doing. You're just kind of being told what to do and move along. Every once in a while, CS gas shows up, and you're just like, "Why am I crying?"
I found myself crying all the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's my first experience was the first memory I have of NTC was we were in the box, and my unit had set up, and then the next thing I know, we're doing our stuff, and there's a perimeter security. But this is back when, like, even brigade headquarters, I don't think were really paying a lot of attention to like internal security, because they were so focused on what is the TOC actually doing. They weren't paying attention on what was around them. And all of a sudden we're like looking up and there's like T-80 just sitting right there.
Yeah.
And of course OP4 had just literally pulled up on our front yard and just was looking down to us, and the OC's just walking around being like, everybody here is like, you're all dead. You're all done. And we're like,
The hand of God went.
yeah. We're all like, what? And I was like, oh great, I gotta go get some sleep. And
Yeah, dying isn't so bad.
No. But and so, so that between that and then, you're trying to do all your movements at night, and that was my first experience with night vision, like the old PVS 7 monocle night visions or whatever they were.
Sevens, yeah.
And
Well, the sevens were too, but
oh no, then it wasn't the 7, it's the monocle.
the 14
No,
was
the 7 was the giant scope one.
yeah.
That was the PV.
Well, the 7
Or no,
is-
no.
The PVS sevens were
The 7 Deltas and the 7 Bravos were the
2.
binocle that went into a monocle.
That's the one.
Yeah,
that's
So
it. That's it.
So that was the one that we had, and so that was interesting. But I just remember being out there and getting ready to move in a convoy, and then the next thing I know, the XO is like knocking on my door, going like, "Are you guys going to move?" And we both, the driver and I, both realized that we had been asleep the whole time, and convoy's gone, and we're like, "Where are they? Where do we go?" And so we just drove off into the night, thinking we're going to go find them. And,
That's not how that works.
but we did. And,
Okay.
And then next thing you know, it all worked out. So I don't know. But anyway, so yeah, it is a very interesting place. I like NTC from an OC perspective, not the in the box perspective.
That is fair.
Yeah.
All right.
Fair enough.
Okay. So back forward, the invasion of Iraq. Fourth ID's not going. And you guys are sitting there saying, us, send us.
You personally, you were volunteering to go. I'm just kidding.
We all wanted to go.
Okay.
I mean, I wanted to go.
Yeah.
I thought we were going. I mean, I think at that point everybody was like kind of clawing to go. Like if there weren't people saying like, we want to be a part of this, I don't know what you're doing at that point.
Yeah, fair.
And so when they went, we sat around, and then you're just kind of going through the motions. It's like, hey, come, everybody get ready. So like I think I went through all my anthrax booster shots, and I think
SRP.
More times than I could count. It's just, and it's almost like, hey, just do it, just because we need something to do, so we're going to do it, just to prep you guys on how it's going to work, so that when it comes time to do it, we all know what we're doing. And we all know the military, it's not how it works. Everybody has instant goldfish syndrome, where you forget how it was done, so the next time it's not done the same way.
Goldfish syndrome.
It's true.
Yeah.
Okay. So you are now a little over 3 years into your career.
Mm-hmm.
You are specialist at this point?
Sergeant.
Sergeant. Okay.
Yep.
All right. And had you decided whether you were going to re-enlist, or had you even thought about it yet?
Nope, wasn't even on my radar.
Just taking one day at a time?
I was literally just riding the day-by-day stuff.
Okay.
The euphoria of everyday existence as a non-commissioned officer in this man's army.
Yeah, I was not paying attention to anything that I was supposed to be doing down the road. I was literally waking up and going to work and coming back, and that was what I was. That's what my mindset was when I was 24 at that point. So I was not in any way, shape, or form looking at what am I going to do at the end of my career, or at the end of this enlistment contract.
Okay.
So we know you end up deploying to Iraq.
Yep.
So when does this happen?
July June or July of 2004.
04. Okay.
Yeah, '04. So we were Operation Iraqi Freedom 2.
2. Yeah.
Yep. So we went in and our 1st Cavalry Division replaced 1st Armor Division in Baghdad. So we went right into right to Baghdad and said, this is where 1st Cav is going to be. So that was I think we were the last unit to drive from Kuwait up into
That's
Baghdad.
I was just going to ask that. So you probably came up from Buka. That's right there on.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to say we were at Camp Wolverine.
Okay.
I'm sure names have all
Yeah,
changed, but all I remember is we were in Kuwait. We ran, again, because we're a low density MOS. They're like, hey, 312th, you're going to run the crew serve weapons range for the entire division to get familiarized before everything. So they put me on ammo detail, and then so here I am as on ammo detail. We're out in somewhere in Kuwait.
Purgatory. Yes.
And what we didn't know is that we were in the impact zone of an artillery site, or it was a shared impact zone or whatever. I don't even know, because who knows what Kuwait was doing.
Yeah.
And we were out there doing all the weapons, and everybody's shooting, and all of a sudden artillery starts flying in, and everybody's like, shouldn't be artillery here. And here I am with, me and like 5 other guys with all this ammunition. I'm like, we're leaving. And
Yes.
so they start, because nobody knew why there was artillery flying in. So we pack up and we start driving away just to get away from all the artillery. And because there were 105 rounds, I think, coming in that we figured out at the end. And so we got out, drove away a little bit, got reset, and then, so I like making fun of lieutenants because I was one. We'll get to that, right? The lieutenant that was in charge of the convoy was like, all right, we're going to get back. And here's your paper map. Here's a GPS, which at the time was just the plugger.
The old pluggers.
Yeah.
The old pluggers, right? And so this guy tries to take us back. And we ended up crossing the berm between Iraq and Kuwait. And I don't know if people have ever had this experience, but I have, which is we drove literally over a 5-foot berm, and there was 100 feet between this berm and the next berm, and in between it, I can only imagine, was a whole bunch of buried things that people shouldn't be driving over.
We call those no-nos. Yes.
Yeah. And what really threw us, and what threw me was we drove over the berm, and I look over, and there's a spent AT4 cartridge just sitting there. And I'm like, I don't think we should be doing that. Drive around, we all get out, we get out, and of course, the whole procedure they tell you is if you think you drive into a minefield, like the first thing you don't do is turn around.
Yeah.
Like the vehicle.
Right.
Here we
Oh,
are.
yeah.
Here we are. So we got out of there, and then we drove back, and then somehow made it all the way back, and that was a very unique experience. But I can say I crossed the berm in a place that probably had never been intended to be crossed.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people don't realize, like, when they say the berm, though, there's literally a berm there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not an expression.
Okay. I had my fair share of fun with the yellow tape areas in the Balkans. So I got you. All right. So you guys did all your I don't know what you'd call it, the training before you drove into Baghdad?
Yeah,
You did,
the RSOI.
You did all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then you guys headed into Baghdad. And you are still, I mean, even though you're an NCO now, you're still in a very specialty field. Were you actually doing that now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we drove up, we set up, and then of course they have every resource that you could possibly imagine floating around theater. So of course our stuff is floating around theater. And that's when you quickly learn that it doesn't work in a major city. Or if it does, maybe somebody much smarter than me probably figured it out. I never really understood what we were doing with my specific system at that point.
Yeah.
And so we did a lot of, we did that, and then they kind of farmed out half of the team that I was a part of to doing different intel roles and responsibilities. And then Yeah, so that was, I mean, they're really, I mean, once you're deployed in that environment, for me, it was a lot. It was a lot of Groundhog's Day type stuff, right? It's you get up. Here's the meeting schedule. Here's the intel schedule. Here's the collection schedule. Here's what you need to do, and then, especially when you're stuck in a hole, which is essentially what the ACE element is.
Unfortunately, yeah.
You're like, all right, go into this hole and do your job, and then come out. I mean, and then go to sleep.
Working on a staff in a deployment like that is like a mix between Groundhog Day and The Office.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of go into your place and do your job, and then we'll be fine.
And every day was just like the next.
That's right.
And the day before.
Yeah. Some days was hotter than others. It was fun just because that was, so you learn very quickly it's a different environment. I mean, inherently, right? But then, it's very weird being, in an area where you're trying to regenerate all your combat gear and get it back up the way it's supposed to and everything else. And, less than 200 meters away is a battery of paladins sending outbound fire.
Oh, yeah.
And, you're like, that sends it through you like, okay, we're actually shooting. Like we're doing something more than just like, let's just be here. Like there's things happening distances away that requires this to be fired right now.
Steel on target.
That's right.
Were you in Baghdad the whole time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever, while your unit was there, did you ever get to go anywhere else for any other reason?
I did. I was trying to, at that point, I had kind of made a decision that I wanted to pursue flying helicopters, because that was why I originally joined the Army.
Right.
And I was becoming a little bit disenfranchised with the whole let's stare at a dot on a screen and see what's going to happen or not happen. So I ended up flying. That again, first time learning what Space A and theater means. But I ended up flying back and forth to Kuwait to do the Army fast test for the flight aptitude test, and then I flew in and around. Just kind of between Liberty and it was Victory at that point.
Yeah,
so Victory in the green zone, to do some medical stuff that they wouldn't do on Victory, and then, but that was pretty much it.
Did you know what airframe you wanted?
If I was going to fly?
Yeah.
I'd always thought about Blackhawks. I mean,
Yeah.
that was kind of the thing I wanted to do. But quite honestly, I probably would have been okay with whatever.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Okay. So how long did that process take of doing all your
Well,
your preparation?
The process took like 3 months, and then I never submitted the packet. So I did all the work to do it, and then at that point, it had become a reality that I probably was going to have to re-enlist because I was up against the 5-year window at that point.
Yep.
And so I was like, all right, well, I'll just re-enlist in theater because you get the tax-free bonus for being in theater. So I was like, all right, well, so I re-enlisted, I don't know, March of 2005, April 2005 in that ballpark. And I think I re-enlisted for another 4 years or 5 years. I don't even remember.
In the same MOS.
Same MOS.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, all right, I'll just keep doing this and keep trucking along. And I mean, it beat the alternative at that point, but I had, I had the ability to put the flight packet in. I just didn't do it in theater, and then just kind of left it. It just kind of went by the wayside.
Did you lose interest in it, or just?
I think it was like, hey, Mike, here's how you procrastinate better.
Yeah.
Right. Like it was one of those things where it was like I always intended to do it, and then the division surgeon was not doing flight physicals in theater, so they wouldn't even. I could do everything but the flight physical.
Which is the long pole and the tent, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so when I got back, the long pole in the tent was, here's your orders, get off of Fort Hood. And so it was like, well, why am I going to waste my time doing this when my next assignment, is to move on to Fort Huachuca, go back to Fort Huachuca. And so I just didn't do it. And then I got involved in the next assignment, and then it was the next shiny object in the career.
So you were off to Fort Huachuca then?
Back to Huachuca, back to Arizona.
So you were in Iraq for 12 months?
12.
Back then that was pretty standard. So, yeah.
Yeah. They had talked about us extending, but they didn't extend us. Yeah.
So 12 months in Iraq and then back to Huachuca
And then-
after swinging through Hood, of course.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
And now, what were you doing at Huachuca?
So I was part of the new equipment fielding team for Common Ground Station. So you had, every system goes through updates, every system gets fielded new equipment or whatever. And so they had put me as part of 306 MI, which was responsible for essentially going TDY all over the place, but resetting all of the equipment along with the contractors that were involved to make sure that all of the common ground stations that were out fleet wide were up to spec and were supposed to be. So
That's the same thing as the UGS, the unmanned ground something system.
yeah, well,
I may know it as a different name, but
Fair enough.
It's I don't know if I want to call it a radar, but it's basically sensors that can feel vibrations.
oh,
on the
those are the
ground.
Romeos.
Okay,
Yeah, the
yeah,
96 Romeos. Yeah, I know what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Okay, but that's different equipment than what you're talking about.
Well, what I'm talking about is the systems that we used in Afghanistan not Afghanistan, in Iraq at that point that I had just used were going through retrofit. Like they were getting new advanced equipment, they were getting new computer systems that all had to be fielded. And then anytime you field new equipment, you then have to train set operators
Of course.
on equipment. So we were a part of the teams that were going out to do that.
Okay. Where all were you going?
Went up to Alaska. We went to Drum. We touched pretty much every Army base, CONUS, that was on our chart to be able to, get people up to speed. Went to Bliss a couple times. And it just depended on the fielding cycle and the fielding, whatever the training cycle was for these units as these systems were coming back. Systems were being repositioned all over the place. So some were coming back from overseas and then getting retrofit and then getting sent to a new unit to get cycled out. So that was kind of the idea of what my unit was part of or what we were doing. So
This is like a long road trip, or you're kind of going and coming back.
going and coming back.
Okay.
Because it was usually like you were gone for 10 days and then you'd come back, and then it depended on the training side. Sometimes, sometimes you were out to just do a refresher course, sometimes because it wasn't a full reset of the equipment.
Okay.
Sometimes you were out there because they had completely reset everything.
Okay.
And it was a new operating system and everything else that we
Yeah.
had to train.
I asked just because after a 12-month deployment and then a turn and then, that head-on pillow time at home is starting to get pretty short, right?
Well, they had pretty much said that, yes, and then, but then they were just started tracking dwell time.
Right.
So your dwell starts to reset, but it's like you come home and you're like, oh, I'm TDY, and TDY doesn't have any impact
Correct.
on your dwell
On your
time
percent
whatsoever.
or whatever, yeah.
But they're just like, no, we got to do it. So that's what it was.
So how long were you doing this? Bouncing around and doing the resets?
Well, so I got to Huachuca 2005, and then at the tail end of 2005, and then I did it for about No, that's not true. I did it for about 6 months. In between there, I went to BNOC, so the basic non-commissioned operating course or non-commissioned officer course for when you get promoted from sergeant to staff sergeant.
Yeah. So
And
this
while-
would be the E6.
Yeah. And so while I was there, they had the Office of the Chief Military Intelligence comes in, and they brief everybody who comes through on the state of the MOS. And my MOS, 96 Delta, there's a reason why you've never heard of it, right? Because it was one of these legacy MOSs, but it was a very small MOS. I think force-wide, there was only like 600 of us. And so the CW5 lightsaber walks in, and he's
Lightsaber.
he's telling everybody about hey, this is what's going on, this is what your branch looks like, this is your promotion opportunities. And the key thing that I remembered was that everybody was essentially fighting for 4 master sergeant spots, and I was like, it doesn't seem like very good odds. And at that point, I was kind of looking at it from okay, if I'm going to make this Army a career, like, what am I doing? So conversely, at that time, they also had a lot of different other briefings. They had the warrant officer briefing where they were doing recruiting, and then they had a briefing for full officers. And so they were like, all right, come in and let's talk about what OCS looks like and what the direct commission program looks like. And I went to the warrant officer one. I didn't really like what they had to say because they basically just said, listen, if you're coming from this MOS, which was my MOS, the only warrant officer that you can move into is this one.
It's very narrow. Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to do that one because I just came from this one. Like, this is not what I want to do. And so I was, didn't want to do it. And then when I went to the OCS one, they said, they talked through what OCS was, why they were recruiting, what everything that was going on was, and then, basic requirements. And if you had 90 college credits and you met the criteria and you passed the local board that General Fast was doing at the time, then you could commission OCS. So I threw my packet together as quick as I could, and I had 92 college credits thanks to screwing around years before and not knowing what I was doing, but I had it. And while I was doing the traveling around the Army to train, I was also in the process to become a commissioned officer.
Interesting. That's a person from HRC, that was Human Resources Command, that was there, or is this somebody from the OCS actual school?
No, I don't know if it was from OCS school. I think it was a local. I think what they did was they were like, in knowing the Army now, it was, hey, Fort Huachuca, you have a requirement to run a board for direct commissioning.
Yeah.
Pick a random executive officer and run an OCS briefing and tell everybody what's going on.
So some captain had to go out there and do it.
It was a tasking.
Yeah. So some major was the one that was telling
major,
everybody about it.
Yeah.
And then,
makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
They sent him a slide deck and said, give this class.
That's right. That's exactly what it was. Yeah.
Well, joke's on them because it worked.
Hey, so I threw my packet together, and I remember my commander. So my commander was a major at that point, which was the first time I'd ever had a major as a commander. He's used to having captains, and he pulled me in and he's like, hey, Mike, you got selected. I was like, really? Awesome. Right?
Me?
Yeah. I was like, this is awesome. He's like, but you didn't get selected. Am I? Are you disappointed? I'm like, no.
Honestly.
And I was like, and back then, so OCS has changed. So back when I went through, OCS was, you had to list 10 branches that you wanted to be a part of, and 3 of the top 5 had to be combat arms. You could not pick, so you can pick whatever you want, but those were the rules. And you weren't, and it was needs of the Army. You weren't guaranteed any of that. The Army could just go right down the list and be like, whatever.
They're going chemical.
So I picked aviation number 1, knowing that I probably wouldn't get selected aviation. But I figured, hey, if you can't, you got to pick, right?
Shoot your shot.
Yep. I picked armor number 2, and then I picked quartermaster number 3. I got quartermaster. And I picked MI. I think I put MI like number 9. I didn't want to be MI anymore. I'd seen what the MI world was, and I was not interested in playing Stump the Chump anymore with MI. Like, I like
wearing
the MI
a wizard hat.
Yeah, I like the MI community. They're great people. They do really good work, but it was not what I wanted to do. And so, so he was like, well, you got quartermaster. I was like, okay. And he's like, so that's supply, beans, bullets, beds, all that stuff. I was like, okay. Well, I mean, it seems like more linear than what I'm used to doing and more logical, more, like tangible, right?
It's very practical.
Right. I was like, all right, cool.
Yep.
I'll do that. So that was fun.
So that would have been very soon before basically before all the logistics branches were merged into logistics.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, that would have been right before.
I think that happened in 2008.
A couple years then. Okay.
Yeah. So I think I should know.
My memory's hazy on that too.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
To everybody out there who's a logistics guy, I'm sorry, I don't remember the birth date of the logistics corps. It's okay. But yeah, so I just basically, so I put my name in the hat, I got selected, and then everything that I was doing up at that point was just literally just not killing time, but just doing what the job required for 312th MI or 306th MI to do new equipment fielding before I went to OCS school at Fort Benning.
Okay, cool. So before we continue on to OCS, let's go ahead and take a break.
Sounds good.
Perfect.
All right, OCS,
OCS.
the Officer Candidate School.
That's right.
How was that?
It was a education in. It was good. It was good. I would say I learned more about military history and more about some of the. It was interesting to see how I got trained because I went through basic training, and then I subsequently went through OCS. So like being 6 years apart, you get to see like here's how they train everybody, and then here's what they do to bring officers along. And a lot of it was how do you make people make decisions? And the common, OCS's motto is standards, no compromise. So when you're at Benning, it's they had four different companies going at the same time. So Alpha through Delta. I think they had just stood up Echo because they were at that point they were like, we need officers like that. So 2006 to 2008, they had shown that there was like this gap in, the officer corps was leaving and they needed to bring in a bunch. So there was just pushing officers into the pipeline.
Well, on the captain side, that's when they did that career incentive.
Yep.
Captain, just to retain certain
Yeah,
branches.
I missed that
They were
by
hemorrhaging. Yeah.
Yeah, I missed the bonus for that by 6 months, but it is what it is. Anyway, so they, so I was part of Bravo Company. Alpha Company was called Alcatraz, just because I guess it was like one of the worst companies. But I don't know. It all seemed bad. I was Bravo, but it was good. It was like I said, it was a lesson in learning how to make a decision. It was a lesson in when in charge, take charge. It was very much because I was an NCO I was an NCO until I wasn't. It was very much get out of the mindset of leading small teams and get into the mindset of how do you make decisions and be the man or woman in that scenario to then lead an organization. Yep.
Okay. All four of those companies, were they all running simultaneously,
Yeah.
or was it on different tracks?
Different tracks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's staggered classes.
It was all staggered classes.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I picked up with Bravo.
Okay. When you got done with OCS, did you go back to Huachuca?
I did initially. I went, and really it was just out process.
That's
Yeah,
so
and,
you
I mean, you
returned,
had pinned at that point.
Yeah,
You
I
had
was a
been
second
commissioned.
lieutenant. I rolled back. I was a butter bar, which was fun. And then my next assignment was, so the Army in their infinite wisdom had decided that because of the event surrounding 506 Maintenance Company leading into Iraq and them getting lost in the whole Jessica Lynch thing, that all lieutenants are going to go through tactical operations training for another 6 weeks because they wanted to make sure that lieutenants had the necessary tools to be able to then make decisions and lead in a tactical environment. So it was 6 more weeks of land navigation and convoy ops and some other stuff. So it was that was back at Fort Sill, so I had to go back to Fort Sill. So that was interesting, being back to where I started basic training. It was almost like I went a reverse pipeline from when I joined the Army. I was like, this is crazy, but here I was. And so that was an interesting school. I think the school only lasted like 3 years, and then they shut it down, and I was one of many people who had to suffer through that school.
When you went back to Huachuca, yes, it was just to out process, but you were probably there for a couple of months, right?
Yeah.
And you went back to your unit.
Yep.
Was there a difference in the way that you were perceived or treated once you got back?
Yeah. I mean, on some hand,
You left an NCO, the backbone of the Army, and now you're a second lieutenant, which are
That's not the backbone of the Army?
essentially useless.
yeah, it was essentially useless. And I was even more useless because I wasn't even really part of the company anymore. So I left, I went back really only to out process Huachuca. I was only there for, I think, 2 weeks. And it was, I ran into a couple people that I knew, and all of a sudden they're saluting me, and I'm like,
This
4
is
months
happening.
ago, it was not that way.
Yep.
I had actually run into a guy who I knew who from when I was at First Cav, he went warrant officer, and I'll never forget this because I saw him when he came back from warrant officer school, and he was a spot, W01, and I didn't know he had gone to warrant officer school, so I was like, "Hey man, how you doing?" We were at a gas station, and he looked at me like, "You have to salute me now." Like he had taken the complete opposite approach of you have to, rank before everything else. Doesn't matter if we knew each other before. And I was like, dude, get over yourself, right? Like, come on. I mean, I had no idea you went, your back was turned to me. I didn't know you were wearing it. Like, whatever. So I kind of had a very different approach when I went back to Huachuca, because if people saw me, I was like, listen, I know I'm wearing this, but like, and I know that I'm now a lieutenant, and yeah, we probably have to do all those things, but you knew me 4 months ago when I was staff sergeant so-and-so. And so like, it's not that big of a deal. Like right now,
Yeah.
I'm not worried. I don't think anybody's really worried about that. We're just moving on with our careers.
Yeah.
Okay. So then where did you get your first quartermaster job?
So that's interesting. So when I went through quartermaster basic, I went to Fort Lee. So I was there for 4 months to go through QMOBC. And then because of I went through this program called degree completion. So because I had 90 college credits, the Army had said, hey, this is what you're going to do. You're going to you're going to go through all your training, and then you're going right back to school. So I was supposed to go to Fort Stewart, Georgia, and so they sent me to Fort Stewart. So I processed and did everything. And then for the next 18 months, I was effectively a civilian.
What university was this program through?
Any university that I wanted to be a part
Okay.
of, but I chose Webster.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, it's on the installation. I'm here to get my degree. I'm here to meet the requirement. I really wasn't paying attention to, Webster's a good school, so I'm not going to.
I'm a Webster grad as well.
I'm not
so.
going to say anything bad about Webster.
Yeah,
Webster's a good school. So, got my degree, and then, so I spent 18 months. I bypassed my entire second lieutenant time while I was in this program. So,
So they protected you, huh?
I guess the only time anybody ever saw me as a butter bar was the time at Huachuca. Really, honestly, I mean, really. And then, towards the end of my degree completion program, I was supposed to go to 4th Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, and I learned that because I was on Stewart, so I saw who was there and who wasn't. They had all deployed. They were coming back, and so I called my branch manager. I was like, "Listen, I don't want to be part of a reset brigade. Like, I know what's coming, and that's really not what I want to do." I said, "Can I get into somebody who's ramping up?" And he's like, "Well, I can send you to Drum or I can send you to Carson." I'm like, "I'm going to Carson." Like, that's not even a question.
That hurts Dan's feelings.
It does not.
He loves Fort Drum.
And I'm like, "I'm going to Carson." Well, my family was in Colorado Springs. Like, there's a lot of good reasons to go to
That's
Carson,
right?
right?
That's right.
So my first duty assignment, I get to Fort Carson. I was supposed to go to 3rd Brigade, 4th Infantry, which was deployed, and they were going to. The idea, what they had been telling me and communicating to me, was that I was going to get there, go through pre-deployment training, and then just go. So I get there. Hey, you're here. Congratulations, you've been diverted. You're going to 1st Brigade. Okay, so I go to 1st Brigade. 1st Brigade did not exist on Fort Carson at that time. 1st Brigade still was home, called their home at Fort Hood, because 4ID had not migrated completely from Hood to Carson yet.
Yeah, that's right.
And so here I was, 1st Lieutenant. I was the 2nd officer for 1st Brigade on Carson. There was a Lieutenant Colonel and there was me. That was it. And we were responsible for standing everything up in preparation for the brigade to flow in. So that's what I got to do as my very first duty assignment.
So you went to Carson to avoid being part of a reset brigade.
Yep.
And instead you got to stand up an entire brigade.
Well, the brigade existed. I got to stand up the footprint
Well,
for the
It was
brigade
more
to
of
follow.
Yeah.
it's kind of like an RSOI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, I did. Yeah, I got. Thanks, Army.
So, Dan, this is foreshadowing, but when he was the only officer working for that 05, that was when he really developed his coffee making skills.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. I didn't drink coffee then. I hated coffee then.
Okay. So this is an interesting point because the Army is pretty good about shuffling units around every so often. But what were some of the some of the challenges that you had standing up this unit, or establishing the footprint and getting everything rolling?
Well, First Brigade,
Especially since there were only 2 of you.
well, so I mean, they had other. I mean, it wasn't just only
Right.
us, but in terms of officers, it was just us, right? And so we had a very small cell, and Fort Carson had just built all these facilities to bring people in. In fact, they had just established the footprint for what was company operation facilities for modularity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole idea of what the Army had become at that point was, how do you make modular units?
Yeah.
How does everything look the same?
The brigade combat team.
Right.
Puzzle piece.
Right.
Yep.
And so they had built it all, and so we had to go through and sign for all the buildings. We had to go through and make sure that the construction and be the officers that signed off on all of it, along with what DPW came through and all the everybody else. But it was our responsibility to essentially take possession of everything, and then prepare the barracks to receive everybody, and then stand up essentially an entire in-processing flow that was different than what new soldiers went through, because they weren't new soldiers to the installation. They weren't new soldiers in the same respect that an in-processing soldier would hit a battalion. They were essentially PCSing from one duty station to the next, but they were still in the same unit. So it was almost like a deployment. So it was just our responsibility to receive them all. So that was interesting. I had never been a part of something like that. And of course, as an NCO, you never get put into that position. Some might, but that wasn't my job. I was an MI, right? So it was one of those things where I had to learn very quickly what my left and right limits were, and then really learn very quickly, like, okay, well, there's nobody else, so who's going to do it? I guess I am.
Yeah.
So
Now, in preparing for all these soldiers coming in, and I mean, you mentioned the barracks. So what about housing, like on-post housing for married soldiers and their families? Was that part of your purview as well?
no, well, I mean, I'm sure it existed, and I'm sure that was part of it, but I didn't have any role in that.
Okay. Anything else? Any other challenges that you ran into?
I mean, it's difficult when you're, so again, because I skipped my second lieutenant time, I come in as a first lieutenant, and there's some level of, well, you've already been an officer for a while, but really, I was coming straight from being an NCO who had come through all the different pipelines, and this was my first experience of like dealing with people and like working as an officer. And so I had a steep learning curve, very steep learning curve, to basically get myself up to speed as to what I should be doing.
That jump from second lieutenant to first lieutenant is a big one because, to your point, there's a assumed level of competence.
Mm-hmm.
And again, everybody likes to joke about lieutenants, but the jump from second lieutenant to first lieutenant is pretty big.
But for me,
It
I
was
was
e-
jumping from staff sergeant to first lieutenant.
Well, yeah, fair enough.
And that was even
But I
more
mean, the way
challenging.
they perceive you.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so because I was jumping from staff sergeant to first lieutenant, there was a gap in knowledge of just unit operations
Sure.
that I didn't understand.
Sure.
And so, being thrown into the mix, even at a small scale, was probably the best thing to happen to me. Well, the best thing and the worst thing. Like, honestly, it was great because I was immediately said, like, here, figure it out. Like, this is what we're doing. You gotta, put up or shut up. But I didn't have anywhere to hide. Like, and I'm not trying to say like I was trying to skirt responsibility, but like, when you're part of like, an actual battalion, there's a lot of other people that can do things to cover and help you. And you have somebody turn to your left and be like, okay, how do you do this?
Yeah.
There wasn't anybody there to do that. It was you either figure it out or that was it.
Yeah.
How, because it was on the officer side, it was only you and the lieutenant colonel.
That's right.
How much did he develop you during that time? I mean, because there was only 2 of you, I'm fairly certain that he got to be aware of your path to that point.
Yeah, I think he knew. I mean, it's interesting. So the guy who was my battalion, the guy who was the 05 at that point ended up being my battalion commander as we then processed into the unit because he was the 4 BSB commander at the time. So we got to know each other. I would say that he didn't really develop me during the window we were all bringing everybody in, and that really kind of waited until more or less I was part of the actual BSB. So like, I got there in 08 and then and then the BSB stood up in its totality in like the beginning of 09.
Yeah. That's a brigade support battalion.
Yeah, Brigade Support Battalion.
Okay. So how long did it take everything to get stood up?
I think it was like 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the units all there, everything's good to go?
Yeah, units there, everything's good to go. We start immediately going into, hey, guess what? 1st Brigade 4ID is ramping to deploy. So, because they had come back, it was a 12-month reset at that point, because Army, I think they had given us a little bit more time because of the move between Hood and Carson to get us
Yeah.
from place to place and get the unit set before then they took everybody back over. But we were on a path to deploy mid-2010, so it was get ready to go to the Joint Readiness Training Center down in Louisiana and get ready to do all sorts of fun field exercises because, 1st Brigade is going to go. And 1st Brigade at that point was heavy. It was supposed to, we were supposed to be armor. And they were like, nope, say goodbye to your tank, say goodbye to everything. You guys are going to Afghanistan, so now you're going to light fight. And so we had to, so not only did 1st Brigade move up, but it shed its complete identity and then turned into a light fighter unit,
Yeah.
all in a 12-month time span before it went over to Afghanistan.
Did you already have all of the heavy equipment?
Oh, yeah.
Like on station? I mean,
Oh, yeah, it was all there.
And everybody was familiar with it. Everybody knew what was going on. Everybody had a plan of action
Yep.
for what was going on.
And
And
then they put everything on cinder blocks.
Yep, turn it all in. We turned all, 1st Brigade turned all of its tanks in, turned all of its Bradleys in, turned everything in, and then we went over and we fell in on theater-provided equipment,
TPE.
TPE.
so when did you deploy?
July of 2010. Went to Afghanistan, went to Kandahar,
Down south.
down south.
Yep.
Yep. So we were responsible for, 1st Brigade was responsible for Kandahar.
Okay. So as a brigade special troops, right?
Support
Or
battalion.
support battalion. I'm sorry.
Support.
Support battalion. What is your responsibility in theater?
So I was the battalion S4, but I was also effectively running all of the contracting, and within about 2 months, I don't know how it happened, but we just got told, hey, we're going to go stand up a forward operating base in this area as a brigade support battalion. So I quickly became the the battalion engineer because my boss was like, build a fob. And I'm like, okay, never done this before. This is going to be interesting. And build the master plan for building a fob. And so as a junior captain, I had to quickly learn how to do it. And because I was the contracting arm for the battalion, everything that we needed to build it flowed through me. So very quickly, like all of a sudden I was in charge of like 2 lieutenants and like 5 other soldiers as an S4, which is not typical for what ends up happening.
Right.
And so we were running contracts to, essentially build what was FOB Walton. And Walton was Walton up to that point was like an ANA, Afghan National Army outpost. And like you could walk up there, but like local nationals could just like walk over the berm because there was no security, like nothing was built.
Yeah.
And so we ended up, building it out with T-walls and everything else. And I had to learn how to contract for that, bring everything in. And then because we were putting people on it, all of a sudden you got to worry about things that you've never worried about before in your life, which is, okay, we need porta-johns, but then you have to worry about black and gray water. You have to worry about things that didn't exist, that nobody ever teaches you.
Maintenance contracts. For,
And you can go to 777. So Red Horse, which is the Air Force squadron that is responsible for construction, and the Navy Seabees were there. And so I got very familiar with 777. And I went over to learn from them a lot about black gray water. And then I ended up calling the city of Colorado Springs and talking to them from Afghanistan, being like, I need help figuring out what my calculations are for black and gray water runoff so I can figure out how to get rid of all of it. And because it's one thing to make it, but then you got to get rid of it, or else you run into, raw sewage overflowing.
Oh, yeah.
And you run into all sorts of things that you don't want on an installation. And it's not an installation, but I mean, like you're in the middle of the desert, but you still have to worry about this stuff because it's all health and safety and everything else.
Like a lot of logistics, it's stuff that most people don't care about
Right.
until
Yeah.
there's something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Now, for the audience, what is black and gray water?
All right, so gray water is...
In the least disgusting terms possible.
No, it's fine. So gray water is what happens when you take a shower, right? You take a shower, what comes out of the shower head, you could drink it right out of the shower head because it's potable water, right? Or not potable water, depending on where you're getting it from. But the moment it touches your body, it gets soap in it, it's gray water, right? You can't do anything with it. You could irrigate, I guess, if you wanted to. You could, I'm sure golf courses use gray water. But in Afghanistan, you're not doing that. Black water is after you use the restroom, that's all goes into sewage. That's black water. And that water is what your septic tank has. And so that's what if you have a septic tank. So, and that's what we had over there. We had septic tanks. And they were septic tanks that had been dug and emplaced well before us, were old, and had septic tank capacities of like 1,000 gallons, maybe 1,500. And when you have, 1,000 American soldiers on an installation with 1,000-gallon septic tank, that tank goes from empty to full very quickly. And so you have to continually pump it out or else it starts overflowing.
Okay.
So I learned a lot about that. And then, but that was pretty much, hey, build this fob. That was my task. And learned a lot about how to contract, how to do all that stuff. But it was also, it was very much a liberating experience because even though I was the S4, like I was kind of just like left alone, like Mike, go do this. And that's what I did. And so it was, and I wasn't the only one. I mean, I say I did it. There's a ton of people involved in all of it. It wasn't just me. Yeah. So
for the contracting, were you using purely local contracts of Afghan nationals, or were you using solely American contracts, or was it kind of a mix?
It was mostly local nationals. Okay. And a lot of it was because we needed cranes, and you can't get cranes from, you're like, hey, I need 3 cranes to do this. And so you go hire a crane, and that's what it is. Or you need 2 more, you need 2 cranes that live and work where you are because you're always moving things around with cranes. And so that's what you hire locally, and then they come on and you have to vet them and everything else.
Yeah. How long did it take to build? I mean, because for 1,000 people, right?
Yeah. Well, Walton was a mess. Walton started with, let's put the brigade support battalion on it first. That was us. We were 400 people, and maybe a little bit more. So it was like, let's build it for 5. But my boss, being who he was like, no, that's not good enough. I want to be able to make it the logistical hub of Kandahar. So I want to be able to put 2,000 American soldiers here, so build it for 2,000. Okay, so that's what we did. And so we could have stopped, after 3 months and living there and doing everything else. We could have very easily stopped and been like, this is good enough, but it wasn't good enough. And so we just kept on adding on and adding on and adding on. And I think when we left, the joke was that it had essentially become big enough to run an alternate landing strip for Kandahar Airfield. And so it was a monstrosity at that point. I think it had.
Now, is that landing strip a joke because of the absurdity, or is it a joke because it was actually possible?
Both. It was both. It was both.
So how long did it take to build that?
Well, we didn't build a landing strip, but you could.
Not the landing strip.
C-130s can go anywhere, but it took the entire. Again, we were building until we left. Like it was always improving and building and
position improvement. Right.
It was always going out. I mean, we were running T-walls like you wouldn't believe, and it became a nightmare for security after a while because we weren't big enough and we weren't bringing the people on, and it was one of those things where my boss had delusions of grandeur, and that was it. So.
Okay.
So, Colonel Kurtz. So 12 months in Afghanistan?
12 months.
Okay. So you do 12 months, you do the better part of building this fob, and then you return to Carson.
And my boss says, hey, Mike, when you get back, we want you to take over command of one of the forward support companies. I said, nope, I'm out of here. Didn't want to be part of 4ID anymore. and was
You're
like,
due for the career course.
I was due for the career. Well, they wanted to give me command before the career course. I was like, nope, I want to go career course. See ya. Left. Turned down command. Most people tell you that's career suicide. I don't really care. I didn't care at the time, so I was like, I'm out. Went to career course. Met my wife in career course.
That's at Fort Lee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Met my wife at career course, which was great. And then I got, so then I got assigned to Germany. So that was my next assignment, right? And so they're like, oh, you're going to 2nd Cav. I was like, all right, let's go. So go right back over to 2nd Cav, and 2nd Cav had I think they had just come back from whatever deployment. I don't remember where they were at the time, but they had just come back, and they were starting to go into the cycle again to deploy. So I went from, brigade combat I went from, Iraq to a little bit of a break to combat Afghanistan. So it was like, now I really wasn't in the reset cycle. Like I was in the definite, like, let's just keep going in the different cycles of deployment. So, but yeah, went to 2nd Cav, part of the Regimental Support Squadron.
And that is stationed where?
Vilsec, so Rose Barracks, right outside of Grafenwehr.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
it's a fun place.
It's not.
You know what? I actually.
Well, okay. Grafenwehr is not a fun place.
Well, Rose Barracks isn't either. Rose Barracks is like the redheaded stepchild of Grafenwehr. But I will say, like, people will call 2nd Cav the 2nd Criminal Regiment. They will say that it's, a very unique. It is a very unique unit. I actually really enjoyed my time at 2nd Cav, so I don't really have much to complain about from a unit perspective. Personalities aside, everybody runs into people with personality issues.
Of course.
But I actually enjoyed my time at 2nd Cav.
Okay. And you had met your wife at the career course.
That's right.
Were you married at this
Yeah.
point?
No, we got married right before. So I met my wife at the beginning of career course, and by the end of the career course, we had decided we wanted to be engaged. And then I went over first, and then I came back and we got married, and we both came over. So it was a very quick courtship, but we both knew what we wanted. And so she came over in June of 2012.
Knowing that you're getting ready to deploy.
Well, she knew it was a possibility, and at that point I knew it was a possibility, but we weren't on the patch chart yet, and so I didn't have anything in the pipeline that said this is what we're going to go do.
Yeah.
But we had made but she had also decided that she wanted to be with me, and I had told her that if wherever we go, whenever we're done with the Army, we'll come right back here to Charlottesville, which is what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of a trade-off.
Okay. So you're married and you're in Germany, and
I was effectively the battle captain for the Regimental Support Squadron. So I did that for, I was the battle captain for the better part of a year in the S3, and then for operations. And then I was planning on being the battle captain going into our deployment for Afghanistan. And then I had the birth of my daughter in March, and while I was waiting for, because we had a high risk pregnancy, so I was allowed not to go to that MRE, so I didn't have to go to that readiness exercise, so I could stay home. And then about halfway through, my boss calls me and says, "Hey, Mike, can you meet me out here? I need to talk to you." I was like, "Okay." He's like, "You're not staying out here, just come out here so I can have a face-to-face with you." I said, "That's fine." So I drove out there, and he tells me, he goes, "You're going to take command." He's like, "The guy who's currently in the seat is not going to be the commander much longer. You're going to take command. So you need to get ready to change your command inventories, and this is the date you're going to take command." Okay.
Roger that.
So I was like, all right. So I went from being operations to being told, "You're the commander going into theater," which was a whole different ballgame.
were you told why he wasn't going to be in command? That seems a bit short notice.
It was short
for,
notice. It was short notice.
These things happen.
I wasn't told directly by my boss, but I knew why. And I knew what was happening. And the people around the whole situation had told me what was going on. So
Okay, we'll keep it vague, but I'll ask: was it an integrity issue, an incompetence issue, or possibly both?
Or was it a professional issue or a personal issue?
All four.
Okay.
So it was all of that.
Yeah.
There was a lot going on with this guy, and so he had already been removed from command once and put into a different command, which was the one that I was then assuming. And so boss made a decision, said, "You're it." So okay. So, which was interesting because he made me the HHT commander, so that's headquarters. But the difference is that this time when we were deploying, they were reconfiguring my company to essentially be a forward support company as the HHT. So you had the Alpha Distro, and then they gave me a maintenance platoon, a medical platoon, and gave me every other capacity besides distro.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to worry about the distro side, but I worried about all the other stuff.
Yeah, headquarters command's usually a second.
Usually, I think because I was prior service, it was a little bit different.
Yeah.
Well, and the circumstances were a bit different as well.
Yeah. I think originally the idea and the way it had been communicated to me was that I was probably going to come in. If everything had been held equal, I probably was going to take over Alpha Distro halfway through the deployment, so that I could also get my distro time. But the way it worked out was fine. So it was great. I actually really enjoyed being more of an FSC commander without the distro side, just because I got to see a lot of different things. I got more experience on the medical realm. I got more experience on the maintenance side than I ever would have.
Forward support company is a little bit of everything.
It is. Yeah. I really enjoyed it.
What are some of the challenges of being a forward support company in a combat theater? Maybe more specifically, challenges that you wouldn't expect.
Well, when you're a true forward support company, so Second Cav was a striker regiment, and each squadron didn't have a forward support company because we weren't structured that way at the time. So all support came from the base. Now you had like platoons that were like forward support, like platoon type-ish things that they tried to farm out and create because they realized they needed it while we were deployed.
Just like slice elements to go off here and
Yeah,
there.
but it was people who were designated assigned.
Yeah.
But like what we did was we effectively made traveling road shows for all of the maintenance requirements to make sure that the guys had what they needed and stuff was being reset where they were, rather than having to bring anything back. So a lot of my, like a lot of the small arms maintainers, electronics repairers, everything else went out and about in the battlefield circulation to be able to repair things and to do services where they needed to be done, vice anybody having to bring it back.
Yeah, sure.
So it was interesting. I mean, I was essentially the forward support company from that respect for the regiment, and so it was just a different animal. It was fun, and I really enjoyed that. That was a good time.
I just totally blanked on what I was going to say.
we're all waiting.
I had a question and I can't remember what it was. Go ahead.
Okay, so how long were you in command?
12 months.
Okay. I mean, anywhere between 12 and 18 months is pretty standard, just based off whatever the queue looks like, right?
Well, I was a commander for 12 months there, and then when we left theater, I left Germany, and then I was immediately put back into command for recruiting. So I had two commands. So all told, I was a commander for 4 years.
Where were you recruiting?
Lynchburg, Virginia.
Okay.
Was that directly after returning to the States?
Yeah, so I actually came out of command on March 19th of 2014, and on March 22nd, 2014, I was the commander for Lynchburg Recruiting Company. So I got a 3-day break.
That's a good gig, though.
Yeah.
I love Western Virginia.
Well, so Lynchburg, Virginia, so the recruiting path that I was in charge of was all of Central Virginia, from Danville all the way up until almost till you get to Winchester. So I had, pretty much the central corridor of Virginia, which was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good job. I like that job a lot too.
Yeah.
Okay, now, given the current recruiting climate, we'll
Yeah.
say, that aside, what were some of the issues that you faced as a recruit commander in that time frame?
Well, I
This
think
is a decade ago. So
sure. I think recruiting is this. So, I don't think that the challenges for recruiting are any different today than they were years ago. In fact, I think ever since the volunteer army has been in place, the recruiting challenges have always been the same, which is how do you get the right information to the right people to make the decision on whether or not they want to enlist in the army. And I think that the Army has made it harder for themselves by implementing processes that don't make sense. And so, my challenges were basic leadership challenges. How do you get people to do the basics of recruiting, which have been shown to work and have been shown to get in front of the right people at the right place and time? How do you get them to do that consistently and then manage manpower? So, my recruiting company was 26 strong, but that was 26 with me and my first sergeant, so you're down to 24. So you only have 24 recruiters. But at any given time, you really only have 20 recruiters working because 4 of them are either on leave, sick, have a detail, or something else. So now you're trying to make mission with 20 recruiters on a month. And if you're in different areas and different mission sets, big Army says, well, your area for the last 5 years has produced X, so this is what you have to do. Therefore,
Yeah.
right? So you know what your mission is, but it's just getting out to do it.
how many stations did you have?
5.
5. Okay.
Yeah, so I had 5 stations, and then
Like in theory, 5 at each station.
no, it depended on. I had 2. I had 3 in 2 of them, 4 in 1, 8 in 1, and then 5 in the other. So,
Is the manning just based on population size around the area?
yes,
Okay.
and it's also based on density of what the expected output's not the right word, but the expected results from that area are
based off of precedent.
based off of precedent.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. And how long was that command for?
3 years.
That's pretty long.
Do you remember, off the top of your head, not just how many people you recruited, but how many of them actually graduated their basic training in AIT? Because not everybody that gets recruited makes it all the way through.
I don't know the answer to that.
Somebody at TRADOC knows that answer, but
Yeah.
it may not have made its way back down.
That's
to
true.
you.
Yeah.
We were responsible for recruiting about 900 people in the 3 years that I was there. So that my mission was right around 300 every year.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So when you finished that second command,
Mm-hmm.
how long had you been a captain at this point?
7 years.
So you're a pretty senior captain at this point.
I was already selected for major at
Okay.
that point.
Yeah,
Yep.
got it. So CGSC, Command General Staff College, that's at least on the horizon for you at this point.
It is. So I got selected to go to the Air Force Command Staff College down at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, which was great. Highly recommend it.
Yeah.
If anybody can get a sister service, CGSC, I would highly
Yeah.
recommend it.
International's great too.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't want to go to Leavenworth. I would have gone. I mean, obviously, if the Army said, no, this is where you're going to go. But I learned just as much, if not more, I think, than I would have learned going to the Air Force side of it, just because the Air Force has a very unique perspective on logistics in general. And as a logistics guy, it was,
It piqued your interest.
it did. It did. Well, I mean, everything moves via air mostly when you're doing stuff, and AMC and not AMC, Transcom, and U.S. Army Transportation Command, and then Surface Distribution, STDC. I can't remember the acronym for that, but those commands are primarily Air Force driven.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to see their perspective on things.
Okay. So how long had you been in? But when you got done with school there,
Yep,
how long had you been in?
18 years.
And you and your wife had agreed that at 20,
That's right.
that was going to be it.
That's right.
So where are you off to for your last leg?
So I fought my way back into Fort Lee, and that was mostly for personal reasons surrounding just health of family. And so we fought my way back here, and I got assigned, and I was part of 59th Ordnance Brigade. So I was the executive officer for 832nd Ordnance Battalion, which was a training battalion focused on some of the lower density 91 series ordnance soldiers. And then the other battalion was responsible for like wheeled vehicle mechanics and striker mechanics, but we were everything other than that. And then I spent a year as the S3 for 59th Brigade as the senior operations officer.
Operations.
Yeah.
Now, when you came back to Fort Lee for your final stint, you knew it was.
Yeah.
You knew you were done.
I knew I was done.
Did the receiving unit know that?
No. No, I
Were
didn't.
you in any way, shape, or form inclined to tell them?
I told them, so not initially. I very firmly believed in not self-selecting myself out of anything. And I didn't want to put myself in a position where if the situation had changed and we needed to stay in the Army for any reason, that I didn't keep my foot on the gas of my career, so to speak. Like at that point, I'd been MQ'd more time, or, most qualified, top blocked. I was getting number ones in what I was doing.
Overachieving every step of the way.
So I knew I was on track for battalion command.
Yeah.
And so that first year, my battalion commander, he's a good friend of mine now, but he asked me point blank, he's like, what's the plan? Are you trying to be battalion commander or not? I said, I'm trying to be battalion commander. He said, okay. He's like, I ask because there's a different level of investment when I know you're trying to do that or not.
Yeah.
If you told me you weren't trying to do that, hey, do whatever you want. But if you're going to, so, I wanted the education as a field grade. I wanted the education from his perspective. I'm glad I got it. And then when the changeover happened and I transitioned up to be the S3, that's when I was less than 12 months away from my potential retirement date.
Yep.
And I just had a hard conversation with my wife and we looked at what was the reality of it. We're like, yep, this is what we're doing. And I went in and talked to my brigade commander. I just said, hey man, I got to tap out. Like this, it's time.
Because those executive officer and operations officer positions are usually held for officers who are at least interested in going into battalion command.
That's
and
right.
Beyond.
That's right.
But you didn't sell yourself short, and that's good.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted the work. At that point, I was so far invested in what my work ethic was that I was going to push anyway.
Yeah.
And I would have, they wanted me to be like, some officer in like force development at CASCOM. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Like that was not what I wanted to do. And my boss saw me coming in and grabbed me out of that place and was like, no, you're coming down to the brigade. And so I'm glad he did. I mean, that was, it's one of those things where everything's a learning experience. And so that was a learning, regardless of whether or not I was going to be the 3 or not, or the XO, like it was interesting learning how big organizations operate.
Yeah.
And then that was like a master class in like stakeholder engagement, like learning how to like deal with different stakeholders of like different organizations doing the same thing.
Yeah. Okay, so when it was all said and done, how long did you serve?
20 years and 6 months.
Okay.
On the dot?
No, it was like 20 years, 6 months, and like 24 days, 26 days or something like that.
got to round up.
I tried
One day I'm going to find somebody that actually nails that not necessarily 20 years, maybe it's 21 years, 22 years, whatever, on the dot. I'm going to find someone.
Well, yeah, it's very hard to do that.
Oh yeah, because of the end of the month. But,
right.
But somebody out there's managed.
Somebody has.
Maybe on a leap year
I
or
was
something.
close.
I don't know.
I was close.
I did not do it.
I was pretty close.
Yeah, I
was
did not
pretty
do it.
I mean, I was at 11 days. No months. It was just years and days. So I was close.
There you go. There you go.
But all right, so 20 years.
Yep.
Or closer to 21. Did you already, or what was the plan after retirement?
Find a job.
That was it? Just
That
find
was
a
it.
job.
I wanted to be done with the Army, and then it was
Here in
corporate
Charlottesville.
life here in Charlottesville. Yep. And so I worked really hard. I was a part of SkillBridge. I used the SkillBridge program to kind of leverage my way into corporate America.
For those that don't know, what is the SkillBridge program?
So SkillBridge is a program that that Department of Defense runs to help transitioning service members, and it helps them by putting them in corporations or companies that are partners of the DoD with an effort towards direct hiring post service.
Yeah, so it's like an unpaid internship.
That's
your
right.
last few months
That's right.
in the military, all services.
Yeah. Nothing like that exists here in Charlottesville. The only company that does anything like that is Northrop Grumman, and they only had one cohort a year. I had missed it, so I had to fight my way in. I actually found a company here that was willing to bring me on, so they brought me on and helped me navigate learning how to be corporate Mike instead of Major Mike Klemmer.
To ease your transition into the real world.
That's
again.
right.
Yeah. Would you say it was pretty successful?
I would say the transition helped. Yeah, I would say I learned a lot about corporate America from that job. Really though, I think the best thing about that program was it gave me time to decompress from the military. It was, I joke. My blood pressure when I was XOS3 was. Doc kept telling me, you need to take high blood pressure medication. I'm like, no, like I'm just in a stressful job. I don't need to take it. He's like, well, the chart says you do. And then I get out of the military, and 6 months later, without no change in anything, I was just not being in those positions, everything's normal. And so it was nice to have the volume turned down from the military. It was nice not to have the phone ring. And it was nice to, have a job where you walked away at 4:00 and there were no more emails. There wasn't a phone call. There wasn't a situation you had to worry about. You didn't have to sleep with your phone under your pillow because somebody might call in the middle of the night. Like, none of that.
Yeah.
You didn't have to check the blotter in the morning.
Yep.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah. Totally understandable. Okay, so you have left the military and you're in the corporate world, but somewhere along the line, you decided that you no longer hate coffee, and you decided that you were going to open up your own coffee business.
That's right.
When did you stop hating coffee? And when did you get the idea for the business?
So I stopped hating coffee back in second cav. So when I was a battle captain, it was one of those choices. It's like
Say no more.
you're going to be up for 22 hours, so you get 2 hours of sleep. So something's got to give, and you need something. And so I didn't like coffee, but I drank it because I needed it. And then my wife was a big coffee drinker, so she really kind of pulled me along into that world. And then I've slowly started drinking it more and more and really liking it, and then liking it more for the properties of staying awake. I didn't actually have the idea to start ARC until about 6 months into my corporate job. Like, I'd been hired, and about 6 months into the job, I was like, is this it? Like, this is it. I left the military, and this is my career. Okay, now what? Right? Because, I just come from a high-paced job as an S3, as an XO, and I was like, I'm going home at 5:00 at night, but then I'm doing nothing. Like, there's nothing. Like, I have all this free time, like, what to do? And maybe I'm a glutton for punishment or whatever, but I was like, I'm going to do something. And, I looked into, the stock market and some other hobbies and some stuff like that. And then I kind of got, out of nowhere, I saw this ad for Black Rifle. And I was like, and I looked, and the wheel started turning, and I was like, well, BRCC is great, but they are very much a special operations focused company. I said, I wonder who else out there is doing anything that focuses on combat logistics or the service support side of the military. And there isn't any, at least not really. And so I just said to myself, what are we doing? Like, why can't I do something like that? And so I put my head around it and said, well, what would it look like? And I kind of went into my planning box of everything that I kind of did when I was an S3. And I said, well, what would it look like? What would I do here? And what came from it was the genesis for ARC.
Okay. Well, that you already went into. Some of my follow-up questions would have already been answered. But where did the name come from?
So I thought long and hard about what we did in Afghanistan, and I was like, I want something that really speaks logistics, and I wanted something that speaks the support side of what I do. And so when we were downrange, we did a lot of CDS, Not
container.
no CDS. Aerial delivery. So we did a lot of aerial delivery. We
Yes.
did a lot of sling load. We pushed a lot of pallets out the back of C-130s, Sherpas, and sometimes C-17s. And I was like, nothing's really more iconic than seeing a parachute with a bunch of equipment floating to the ground. And I was like, I had a hand in that.
Yeah.
Because we prepped a lot of the stuff that then ultimately the Air Force and other people delivered. And so I was like, all right, that sounds good. Let's do that. And so I came up with Aerial Resupply.
Okay. Now you already said that your planning experience and everything in the logistics helped with some of your research and everything like that, and getting the idea. What are some things that you were not necessarily ready for?
Oh, the whole marketing and sales side of this business. Operationally, I was, and logistics wise, back end wise, I knew everything I was doing. And even making the product, like I really had a good idea of what was going on. But from the front end business, the marketing sales side, no idea. And that was something that I had to learn, and something that I'm still learning. Like if I had to put a number on it, 1 to 10, 10 being like I know everything and 1 being like I know nothing, I'm probably still like at a 4, even after 3 years in business, because there's just still so much to learn.
But you think you got a pretty solid grasp on it now?
I think I'm getting there.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things I could be doing better. I think there's a lot of things that I think there's a lot of things that I need to refocus my efforts on, but there's also so many good things that I've done. I think there's a huge following for ARC right now. I think that people have really grasped the concept of what I'm doing, and now it's just figuring out how to promote it in a way that resonates in a much larger audience.
You are, correct me if I'm wrong, but your biggest social media footprint is probably on LinkedIn?
The most active, yeah.
Or most active, okay. Because that's where I first discovered you, was actually on LinkedIn of all places. And that's when I was going through my transition. So I was starting to try to build my network and get ready for retirement. And I swerved into your orbit, and that's kind of the precursor to how all this got set up. But I guess my question is, when do you scale? Like, how do you begin to scale with your business? Starting from the first day you decided you wanted to make coffee, like, just kind of talk us through what that looks like.
So, I think initially it's, will somebody buy my stuff?
Okay.
Right? Like, the very first question is my product even a viable product? And if the answer is yes, then how do I sell 1? How do I sell 2? How do I sell 4? How do I sell 8? And how do I do those metrics? And then once you get to a certain point where you realize that your capacity far exceeds the requirement far exceeds your capability and capacity to generate the requirement, then you got to make some decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that, for me, I've taken some pretty big leaps ahead.
Yeah.
I could have done incremental scaling, but I've decided to be like, okay, if this is what it looks like here, then what does it look like 2 years down the road? I'm going to plan for what I need 2 years from now, not what I need tomorrow. And so, that's a very unique way of looking at things. I think most businesses probably wouldn't do what I do, because they would look at cost and they would look at everything else. But I've almost taken a, if you build it, they will come approach to ARC in terms of what I can do. So, like, I can roast over 100,000 pounds of coffee now, but 3 years ago I could roast, 100 bag, or I could roast, 50 pounds of coffee a month, as opposed to now where I can roast 10,000 pounds of coffee a month. And so that's one of those things where you just gotta, you gotta understand the demand cycle and really what you want your operational equipment to look like and what you want the, how you can meet the demand.
Your different flavors, and you have many. What's your creative process in determining how to create a new flavor, or how to hold or fold what you got? Like, kind of what's your process?
Well, so a lot of it is really, so everything starts with the coffee, with the green, right? I mean, the green is going to tell you what the flavor is right out of the gate. I mean, you're going to be able to roast that to, for me, I roast everything to a medium, at least as an initial, to get a sense of what the coffee actually is. Like, because you joke about it, but coffee does have a personality. It depends on where it comes from and the origin and everything else. But you got to be able to like really understand what the flavor profile is, kind of dead center, before you can then move left or right, either to a lighter roast or a darker roast. So for me, I have 2 lights, 2 mediums, 3 darks, and my process has always been find a flavor profile that most people will enjoy without being overly acidic and I don't roast burnt coffee. So some people do, I don't. And for me, it's you dial it in, you find what you like, and then you repeat it until I'm confident that I'm hitting the same flavor profile every time. And then you go into this process called cupping, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with wine tasting.
Not really.
Or like sommeliers or like beer. You can taste, so the way cupping is basically you're putting coffee in your mouth and then you're spitting it out to literally just get the flavor of what it is. And you can roast something and vary it just enough so you have 6 different roasts that have all done just a little bit different, and then you pick which one of those you like.
Okay.
And then that's the target that you're roasting every single time, because that's the one that tastes the best out of the variations that you did.
And consistency.
And the consistency. It's also a quality control metric.
Yeah.
So I do that all the time, where it's you pull something from, I'll roast, 5 batches of Firewatch or whatever I'm roasting, and I'll pull some of it and set it aside so I know what it is, and then I will go through that entire process to make sure it meets the standards that I want before it goes out the door.
Do you ever focus group any of this stuff, or is this pretty much?
No, I haven't focus grouped any of it. I've really been reliant on the community to give me feedback on everything, which has been great, because I feel like it brought the community along and brought people involved.
Buy in.
Yeah, people bought into this.
Yeah.
Your wife is one of the big reasons that you got sucked into the coffee world.
Mm-hmm.
Which is her favorite? Be honest.
Campfire Kitty. She is a huge fan of the Swiss chocolate coffee. That is by far her favorite. It's funny because she doesn't like black coffee, but she likes Cavalry, which she's a big fan of that one too.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because she used to be, I need a lot of creamer, I need a lot of sugar in my coffee. That's how I want to drink my coffee in the morning. And what has in turn happened is she's gravitated more towards black coffee and less of other things as we've gone along. And it's interesting to see, because like that's how it happened for me. Like I went from being, I'll only drink it if it has a pound of sugar in it, to now if it's black, I love it. Like I just like the flavor of coffee.
What is something in the last 3 years, right? Because you're going to continue to apply things that you've learned through your military experience and the growth of your business, whether you do it knowingly or not, right? What is something that has worked out extraordinarily well, maybe unexpectedly well, and then maybe one thing that didn't work out as well as you thought?
I would say that the thing that's worked out better than I could have imagined is kind of the way I've chosen to do outreach from a B2B perspective, not only on LinkedIn, but also other places, and kind of the focus platform that I chose to use to promote ARC, right? I thought that LinkedIn would be the right place because it was more focused on decision makers and finding people who are interested in this. But it really didn't even dawn on me until I was about halfway through the last 3 years, like a year and a half ago, how much people who are like really invested in the brand want to see the brand succeed and then promote the brand elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that could have happened on any platform, but I feel like LinkedIn was a better choice because it's where, it's whatever their moniker is, it's where professionals reside, right? And I think that's true. It can happen anywhere, but that was the platform that I chose. What hasn't worked so much is I've really struggled at I would say the marketing side and the paid advertising. Like I've spent more money than I'm proud of on the marketing side of it for it to not have worked.
Yeah.
And don't really have much to show for it. And it's really disheartening that I've just watched it go away and not realized what I was doing wrong and then not changing it fast enough to really make it work, or just made a bad decision in general. And so I've made a couple of bad decisions in that regard.
I mean, it seems like sometimes it feels, because we run into some of this too, it's the capital A, the algorithm, right? And it's this black box that none of us can see into, that controls in a lot of ways so many of the things that we do. And you try to learn and understand it, but it's a beast too, and it's changing and evolving. And
Well, I think social media is one avenue. I think people look at social media and say social media is marketing. It's not. It's a channel of marketing. And, there's so many different ways to promote your business, but people think that the only way to promote it is to make viral content that sits on social media, because that's it. That's the only way. And that's not. I mean, and so people just go away from all the other sides of it and don't do any of the other stuff. And then they wonder why, when their channel doesn't work, their business fails.
Yeah.
And so, I've done social media, but we're so much more focused on a lot of other things than just social media. It's what I do because it's what, as the face of the company, I try to build in public. But what ARC does behind the scenes, it's immense.
yeah.
Well, going from a heartbroken college dropout to enlisting in the Army, to going to OCS and multiple tours in combat zones, to now small business owner, entrepreneur, and father of Freedom Kitty. Would you do it all again?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think the Army was the best choice. I think the Army was the best choice for my career and for my life. I mean, like I said, I wanted a kick in the pants when I joined, and it gave me exactly what I wanted.
You certainly got it.
I got it.
Would you, if you could go back, would you choose a different enlisted MOS?
No, I don't think so. I really don't. I don't. I
Landscaper.
Think 5 years of landscaping,
Yeah.
still didn't change his mind.
Yeah. No, I don't think I would. I think I'm a big believer that the path doors open because of the path that you chose.
Yeah.
And that, you're kind of where you're supposed to be. And, the opportunities that I have today and what I did, it would have all looked completely different had I chosen something different. Like, I wouldn't be here right now. And I mean, that's true with everybody because of the choices that we make along the way. But I'm very happy with the way everything's turned out.
If you have any parting wisdom you would like to share with maybe somebody who's interested in joining the military or not, young people.
Somebody that's interested in starting their own business.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Anything.
Sure.
Yeah.
For joining the military, I would say do what you think is best for you. Don't listen to anybody else. People will always find ways to tell you why you shouldn't do something. Rarely will they tell you reasons why you should. And so you have to trust yourself. I had many people tell me that I was an idiot for joining the Army, and if I had listened to them, I wouldn't be here right now. For small business ownership, I mean, the easiest advice is, if you're thinking about doing it and you have an idea, if the idea lives in your head, you're never going to do it. Write it down and start building out the process to do it, and then force yourself to put it into motion. Because if you're always waiting for the best time to do it, it will never happen. And you'll just sit there and then you'll wonder why you let 6 months go by before you did it.
Yeah.
And then somebody else comes across the idea.
Well, but even then, the idea, millions of people make businesses and make money off of ideas. It's not a new idea. It's a product that people need. Mm-hmm. Coffee is a commodity that people want to drink. So it will always be there.
Yeah. I mean, indecision is a decision.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, thanks a lot. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
We're glad this finally got a chance to
so
happen.
much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
This has been outstanding.
I appreciate it. I'm happy to do this.
So it took a year, but we got to sit down with Mike.
We did. It was good to see the roastery.
Yeah.
And mostly smell. That place smells
that place
amazing.
smelled amazing.
It smells absolutely amazing.
Like, as soon as you opened the door, it was, bam,
Yeah.
smells delicious.
He opened the lift. It's like a garage door, like a lift door, and it just came out into the parking lot.
It wafted out.
Yeah, it was good. So yeah, that was over a year in the making. So glad we did it. So
Yeah.
what are your key takeaways? What do you think?
Leaving behind like all the college stuff, but I think sometimes we forget that MOSs get created and phased out fairly frequently.
Yeah.
But then you forget about them, and you forget about what their purpose was, and what their intent was. And he came in the Army about the same time I did. I'd never heard of it before. Didn't even know that it was a thing.
Yeah.
It's the intent. I understood the intent of the MOS, but you have to have like the perfect conditions and the cooperation of a friendly Air Force in order to actually be able to do your job.
Yeah.
I see why that MOS was phased out.
Well, I could see how that would be a good MOS for the Cold War if you're doing a large scale massing forces, fold a gap
Yeah.
type scenario, and you have the air supremacy to be able to pull it off.
Yeah. But I mean, we're talking 99, I think you said?
Yeah.
We're a bit past that.
Yeah.
But he's still, he re-enlisted to stay in it. After 5 years, he re-enlisted to stay in it.
Yeah, sounded like he didn't really have. So he kind of bombed out of college the first go around and didn't have a real drive or ambition, and so the kick in the pants was his phrase he used. The Army gave him a kick in the pants.
Yeah.
Noted, and that applies to me as well. What I thought was curious was come time for his first enlistment to start wrapping up, he still didn't really know what he wanted to do with his life. Am I a career guy? Maybe not. I don't know. And so he did re-up to do that particular MOS. I'm wondering what was going through his mind to stay.
And
maybe he knew he was going to go warrant or OCS or something.
Well, he had put in the flight packet, and everything just. He had said that he was just taking it basically one day to the next, one close target at a time, and I get that. And then about the 10-year mark, or just under 10 years, is when he went to OCS, and I guess that's probably about the same time a lot of people are not figuring it out, but that's that decision point, right? Is, do I stay or do I go?
Do I stay or do I go?
And that's when he decided that he was going to go to OCS. So I get that. You don't. You can only take it one day at a time. So for so long before you really have to make that decision, and then he hit that decision point. So I get the staying in that MOS. I don't think I could have done it. It sounds extremely tedious.
Yeah.
But still, a lot of interesting experiences. From gardening to actually doing his job in a basement,
Gardening
or a bunker. He said. He said he was actually doing it in a bunker.
When you're in a G2, there's an awful lot of time spent in a windowless room. You start to feel like a mushroom.
That sounds so awful.
Yeah, you start turning into a mushroom after a while.
A fun guy?
Yeah.
But not a fun guy?
No. Yeah. So it goes OCS. He, plays ball and has to do the, combat arms in top 5, I think he said, and did all that. And then he ended up getting quartermaster, which we didn't explain in detail in the episode, but the way it works now is, this is on the officer side. Mm-hmm. When you are commissioned, you commission into one of the logistics branches. So there's ordnance, quartermaster, and transportation. And so as a lieutenant, you go through those tracks, as with that being your branch. when you finish your lieutenant time, you go to the captain career course just down the road from where we are in Charlottesville here at formerly Fort Lee, now Fort Greg Adams, which is the Sustainment Center of Excellence. And then when you come out of the captain's career course, when you come out on the other side of that, you are branched into logistics, which is much more of a generalist within the logistics branch. So you're now qualified as a logistician. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time in that schoolhouse. I know you know this, but just explaining for everybody. So as a non-logistician, I was an instructor at that logistics school for 4 years. Again, not a logistician. So I learned a lot about it, kind of the ins and outs of how all this works. And I will tell you, as being a maneuver and a fires and a special operations guy, when you are hanging with other logisticians, whether they be lieutenants or otherwise, you do not care what their branch is. Because when you see a logistician, you see a logistician. And it sounds like he kind of experienced a little bit of that when he was talking about in Fort Carson.
Yeah.
When you show up and it's you in an 05 and it's, hey, sir, the last thing in the world you say is to the boss who's like, hey, I need you to help me do this quartermaster stuff. You don't say, whoa, sir. I'm a transportation officer. That's not going to go so good for you.
Yeah, I imagine not.
So, and then the degree completion program he did. So sorry to cut you off there.
He dove right into it, and he had a broad range of experiences, some of which he did not tell us on camera. Yeah. He told us about during the break and then afterwards. That does happen a lot.
We get a lot of off-the-record discussions, too.
Yeah. Yes, but, I mean, he enjoyed it. He loved it like everywhere he went. And when he first found out that he was branched quartermaster, and he was told by his commander or whoever it was that told him, you didn't get MI, maybe it's just the way that he told it to us, but it was like he was supposed to be disappointed with that.
Oh.
Like, I didn't get military intelligence that I've been allegedly doing for the last 9 years.
Oh, shucks.
You know? And he was not upset at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, he dove right into it and then finished out his time, met his wife along the way, met some great people. She turned him into a coffee drink. Well, she and his battle staff time. Yeah, battle captain time. Turned him into a coffee drinker, and now he uses all those talents and planning skills and preparation skills to run his coffee company.
Yeah.
Of which we are proud affiliates, though we did not talk about it during the actual discussion.
We'd already put him on the spot so much as it was already.
Yeah. But it was that was a great talk. Yeah. It was very, very interesting the way that he went about taking his seed of a possibility of starting his own company, and then using all those planning and what's the word I'm looking for? I guess almost like backwards planning skills and making it happen.
Yeah.
And he was right. You know, if you've got an idea, then do something with it.
Yeah.
Don't just let it, stay up there in your brain. Actually start writing it down and mapping it out and deciding what you want to do. Otherwise, you're not going to do anything with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a thing that I actually said a couple times, so I'm being self-referential here, but my experience has taught me that indecision is a decision. And so that doesn't mean go through life half-cocked, but it does mean that if you sit around and try to wait for that perfect time or that perfect opportunity, it will often not come.
Perfect is the enemy of good.
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily have to be career advice, too. I mean, my wife and I like to, we went through an adoption process, and something that we've often counseled other married couples on is when they say, hey, we've really thought about doing adoption. We always tell them, it's awesome, it's great, wonderful, let's do it. Start now, because it's going to take a lot longer than you think it's going to. Yeah. It's going to take 3 years, so start today. Yeah. So, good stuff. Well, it was good to get on the road.
Yep. And for the listening audience, we are actually recording in our hotel room right now because Mike had a business meeting he needed to go to.
He got the Zamboni out and
he swept us
out.
away. So we are recording in our hotel room because the hotel we are staying in does not have a business center or anything like that.
So if it looks like we're shooting this in a hotel room, well,
this is not a hostage video.
blink twice if you're under duress. Okay.
But yeah. It is good to be on the road again.
Yeah.
It has been about a year.
Yeah.
So.
Both times in Virginia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for those who have been with us since the beginning, we shot 4 episodes very, very early on in the show. I mean, it would have been episodes 3 through, check my math on that, 5 or 6, depending. 6.
3, 4, 5. 6 was Jessica Hess, I believe. For the Memorial Day episode.
Yeah, you're right. And
then 7.
Good point.
So there's a break in there, but you can tell which ones they are because obviously the video quality is less, and were all shot in the same position in the VFW, so you will see the same background in each.
In Yorktown, Virginia, good stuff.
Yes.
Also, I may or may not have been less than a week post-surgical, and I may or may not have been on heavy painkillers. There's some Tracer Burnett lore for you.
While that does explain his slurred words, it doesn't explain his drooling. So
that's a feature, not a bug.
But yes, it's great to be back on the road. We're very grateful that we finally got a chance to sit down with Mike. And, yeah.
So we look forward to continuing to work with him, and we'll see how that shapes out in the future. So,
you got anything else?
I do not.
All right. It's free fire time.
It is indeed, and I'm putting you on the hot seat. So, if you could, let's just assume that you have all the requisite talents. If you could be on, or a member or starter on any professional or collegiate sports team throughout history, what would it be, and and when, obviously?
On the one hand, I think that being on I believe it's the 2001 Miami Hurricanes football team. It has produced an absurd. I don't think there is any other collegiate football team of any year that has produced as many Hall of Famers, like NFL Hall of Famers. I mean, you're talking like Ed Reed, Warwick Dunn, I think Warren Sapp,
Ray Lewis was,
Greg Olson's not in the Hall of Fame
by then.
I think Ray Lewis was the year up before.
Yeah, I think that's
But
right.
I mean, it's something like. I think Edgerrin James was on that team, and he was the 3rd string running back.
That's crazy, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think Frank Gore was on that team,
lightning
too.
in a bottle, right?
I mean, yes, it is insane how many just amazing, talented guys were on there. And knowing, my talents,
you would have been.
I would have been the water boy. I would have been the water boy, or I don't know, maybe I could be like the long snapper. There we go.
Yeah.
I could be a long snapper. It's not going to ensure me a professional career, but yeah.
Long snapper is another one of those positions that, it's like being a logistician. Nobody cares about it at all until it's messed up.
Yeah. Well, most long snappers are not. That's not actually their skill position. A lot of them are tight ends or sometimes offensive linemen, and they just need somebody to do it, so they do it, and then it's kind of like by default, like, well, you did it last time, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay.
Very few long snappers have the career of a J.J. Jansen of the Carolina Panthers, who is the longest tenured member of that football team at something like 24, 25 years.
The longest long snapper.
Yes. He has, I mean, the team's only been around for like 35 years, and he's been with it.
The Panthers?
Yeah, for 25.
Yeah, 35 is too long. It was mid-90s.
95 was when the team was awarded.
Yes.
And this is 2025. So, okay, so I guess it'd be 30 years. Sorry. So he has been with the team for almost its entirety.
That sounds right. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. As a long snapper.
So your answer is the 01 Miami Hurricanes.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Or the Chicago Black Sox. And really just, I think, because that would be an interesting time to be a sports celebrity. and some quick cash.
Yeah, fair enough.
But the Great Depression was right around the corner. And gangsters.
Because we don't have those anymore.
Not in Chicago.
No. Jeez.
Oh, boy. What about you?
Okay. My number one answer would be the 85 Bears.
Of course it would be.
Of course it would be.
As soon as you asked the question, I knew what your answer was.
Well, you think you know me. The 85 Bears. I would also be a long snapper because I have absolutely no talent whatsoever. I'm not even good at podcasting. 85 Bears. Just obviously there's a lot of parody that's gone on with the Bears shuffle, or the Super Bowl shuffle, and all the silliness that went along with that. But again, all just kind of lightning in a bottle. It's that level of excitement has been really hard to replicate, and obviously
for Bears fans, yes.
Yeah, that's true, and particularly since the Bears haven't won a Super Bowl since then. They've been to a couple but lost, but they have not won a Super Bowl since then. It made me a Bears fan for a very long time. I don't really follow the NFL anymore.
That's fair. And I mean, you would have been there with some great players too. So
yeah. I want to give an honorable mention though to the 2001 Colorado Avalanche for Ray Bork's one season that he came to Colorado and played, won his Stanley Cup, and then retired.
Hey,
but Joe
go out on top, right?
Patrick Waugh,
Yeah, I guess, but I mean that's a pretty broad topic, because I mean I'm sure that if I knew more about, like, I don't know, equestrian polo or something, or I don't know, golf for that matter.
You're not gonna say, "Oh boy, I wish I'd been in."
I'm sure that there is probably some. What's the golf tournament where it's the Europeans against the Americans?
No idea.
I don't know. But I'm sure that there is some legendary, golf team, for something like that.
That is not the direction I thought you were going.
No. I mean, there's obviously a lot of different sports out there that, we don't follow. So I'm sure that there's probably some good historical moments that we could have been part of.
Well, I thought you were going to say, I would have.
I don't know.
Alfred the Great's number one jousting team. I mean,
honestly, jousting seems horrible. That seems awful. I don't think I'd want to do that. I mean, the Miracle on Ice. That would have been a pretty cool team to be amazing, part of.
Yeah, we didn't. I guess the Olympics would count as well. Yeah, sure. What was the Mesoamerican game where they would kick, a severed head through
the hoop?
Through the hoop, and if you lost, like you would all get kicked down the stairs.
Yeah,
to the
you'd all be
Templo Mayor.
Yeah, you'd be all sacrificed.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I can't remember.
For a good cause.
I can't remember the name of
no
the
pressure.
sport, but
no pressure.
Yeah. But all right.
Okay. Well, thanks for taking in the show, watching it, listening to it. We appreciate everybody following.
Yep.
We'll shoot another episode while we're on the road here in Charlottesville, so that'll be out shortly after this one.
Yeah. Or maybe before.
That's true.
It depends.
So
yes. So like, share, subscribe, comment, rate, review,
feed the beast,
all that good stuff. Check out. Obviously, he's an affiliate of ours, yes, but he's also a veteran, and he's building a business from the ground up. So go on over to Aerial Resupply Coffee and check it out. Yeah. He's got a new tea coming.
Yeah, he mentioned
I believe
that.
In the next,
I don't
in the
know
next
if we're
month
spilling
or so.
The tea, as it were.
Ooh,
see what I did there.
But he's got a whole bunch of other flavors and stuff coming, and man, it smells so amazing in there.
Yeah.
But
he's easy to find on LinkedIn. That's kind of his number one go-to, but he is on all the social media. Yeah.
But veterans helping veterans, right? Yeah. So check it out. If it's something they're interested in, give it a shot.
Yep.
And remember, your service matters.